Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're enjoying the song service that Jared's put together for us. I'm Alex Nelson, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the song that we just sang, The Greatest Commands. It's one of my favorite songs that we sing. It's got a really great harmony, but it's got a really great message. The soprano line references something that Jesus says in Matthew 22, and Luke, and in Mark as well. And it's the greatest commandment that's referenced there. But before we actually dive into that text, I wanted to make an analogy to a piece of science fiction that I really enjoy. So it's one of my hobbies when I do have spare time, is I like to read classic sci-fi novels. I have several above our fireplace of the Barnes & Noble leather-bound classics, and I like to dive into those from time to time. One of my favorite authors of classic science fiction is Isaac Asimov. I've read through his Foundation trilogy several times, and I've gone through a couple of other of his series. One of the series that he does is a robotic detective one, and it's been made into a major motion picture starring Will Smith. I'll leave the criticism for that for another time. But in the book and in the movie version of it as well, you get this reference to the 3 laws of robotics. So Asimov lays out this foundation for how robots are to behave. And so the first law is that a robot cannot harm or by inaction allow a human to be harmed. The second is that a robot must follow any orders that are given to it by a human as long as it does not interfere with the first law. And then the third law is that a robot cannot allow itself to be harmed unless that were to interfere with the first or second laws. Now, this set of 3 laws allows Asimov to describe how robots behave without having to go in and describe every single behavior that a robot might have to follow. And as you might imagine, that could get difficult to describe every single thing. And it lays out this foundation so that you can work with robotics without having to describe exact behaviors. This is a good thought. When Asimov is asked, do you think this is really the way that we could work with robotics? He actually replies, yeah, I think it's the way that humans work with anything. And so he tries to make it more broadly applicable. And I think this is interesting. And it's something that I think as humans we often do, is try to describe choices, decisions that we make in terms of these heuristics, abstractions that we make in order to make our decision making easier. There's a whole branch of philosophy, ethics, that deals with this problem. How do humans make the right decisions, and what are the right decisions? So John Locke, in his philosophy, communicates this theory of life, liberty, and property. The words are actually a bit more extensive than that, but it's usually described as life, liberty, and property. And in the Declaration of Independence, it's actually modified to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But then you see other ethicists come up with different formulations of how do you make decisions and how do you know that they're the right decisions, and you try to come up with these heuristics instead of defining every single decision that a human could make, because that would be prohibitive. You just couldn't lay out every decision that a human would make. The Bible does this too. So in Exodus, you get the 10 Commandments, and it's a set of 10 laws that God has handed to Moses that he then gives to the Israelites, that are these really important laws that they're supposed to follow. And then you get in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, you get more of the law. And so in the entire Torah, you have this large number, I think it's 613 13 laws by the Hebrew tradition. So it's 613 laws. Some of them are positive laws, things that thou shalt do. And some of them are negative laws, things that thou shalt not do. But trying to remember 613 laws, whether they're thou shalt and thou shalt not do, that starts to get really like a long list that you have to remember. So rather than focusing on those, they try to come up with different heuristics. And so in Micah, you get this phrase that, oh man, you know what is good, to do justice, to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. And so it's sort of an abstraction of the other laws that are given to you. Is you know what is good, oh man, God has told you, and here are the things. And so rather than laying out every single law, you get this basic heuristic. So now we turn to the text that is referenced in the song, The Greatest Command. So this is Matthew 22. He's been accosted by the Pharisees, and then by the Sadducees, and then again by the Pharisees. In the Matthew translation, the Pharisees get together, and a lawyer comes up to Jesus, and he says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And so here he's trying to trap them. In the Mark translation, it's a little bit less confrontational, and in the Luke translation, you actually get that Jesus asks this question to the lawyer instead. But in any case, Jesus in verse 37 lays out this very profound set of just two laws that are fundamental for our faith. It says, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So with these two laws, you get this fully fundamental foundational set of things that you would have to do. And if you try and put any other definition of our faith or a religion against it, you can find that it's pretty similar or can be boiled to those particular two foundational views. So in James 1, you get pure and undefiled religion is this, taking care of widows and orphans in their time of need. So that is a loving kindness that you get that is a result of loving your neighbor as yourself. And then immediately after that, in James 1, you get something that is like the first commandment as well. So that is, and to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world, which is to be loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so you get these two laws. So going back a minute to Asimov and the Robot Trilogy, at one point, one of the robots comes up with this formulation that there's a Zeroth law, a law that exists as a consequence of the first, second, and third laws. And that law is you cannot harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm, and then modifying the first law so that it cannot violate the Zeroth law. And I thought this was interesting, that as a consequence of this set of laws, that there's this underlying law which exists. And so I started to think about the greatest commandments. Is there a Zeroth law for the greatest commandments, or a first principle that you can get down to? And I think it's actually there in the song, The Greatest Commandment, as well. And I think it comes down to God is love. So that is what we can arrive at as far as first principles are concerned. God is love. Because God is love, you are to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Because God is love, you are called to love your neighbor as yourself. Because God is love, you are to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. All of these things can be boiled down to the single statement that God is love. And using that as a guiding principle, we can determine everything that we're supposed to do.